Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you with a video today where we're going to be reviewing the Ruby and Sapphire Starter Deck for the new Into the Inklands set. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. We are also doing a giveaway in this video when we reach 1,000 subscribers and 100 likes on this video. I will actually be giving away a copy of the deck that I will be reviewing in this video. To enter, all you have to do is be subscribed, hit like, and then leave a comment down in the comment section with your like number to get entered into the contest. And I said as soon as we hit those numbers, we'll be doing a drawing for a copy of this starter deck. Now in this video, we're going to be breaking down the cards that are in the deck, kind of some of the cards that I would take out if you're looking to upgrade the deck or if you're participating in a starter deck challenge this coming release weekend, as well as my general thoughts at the end on the overall quality of this deck. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in to the deck list and see what is in the Ruby Sapphire list. Okay, so first thing we look at is the cost curve over here. Very kind of middle of the road curve here. Tops out at 5. Lots of 2, 3, and 4 drops in here. One thing that is kind of concerning right out of the gates is a very high number of uninkables. 13 is a lot. It might not feel like a lot. The curve is a little bit lower, so that does help with that. But 13 is a lot to be playing a deck out of the box, especially one that is a pre-constructed deck, so you don't really get to put that input into like making that high unink count work for you. This is some place that I would look at immediately, and we'll talk about some of the options after this of addressing if you are playing in like a starter deck challenge with this particular deck, is getting this uninkable cost down, preferably under like 10, closer to like probably 6 to 8 if at all possible. Take a look at the cards. We've got 2 copies of Minnie Mouse and 3 copies of Flounder and the 1 drop spot. These are both reprints. With this particular deck, there are 9 cards in this deck that are reprints from the first set. So if you see some cards in here that look like cards you know, that's because they are cards you know. So we've got 5 1 drops in here. Very nice cards to start out with your curve. I do tend to prefer in the limited formats the 2 2s for 1 because they can trade for other 1 drops, whereas the 1 3s really are just there to kind of get picked off in the middle of the late game. You have 3 copies of Della Duck. She's a 3/3 for 2, which is nice. She is uninkable though, and there's 3 copies in the deck, which is kind of rough. And she does have Reckless, which means by herself she can't quest for any lore. Now, I will say if you're playing against the other deck that is running all the extra puppies, which are 2 3s for 2, having her in play early is going to be really nice in those situations, because she is going to be able to trade, you know, for 2 of those puppies in those situations, or, you know, if she is able to heal or something else after those interactions. She's not terrible because of the stat line. Again, 3 uninkables is kind of rough, especially when it's a card by itself. It can't advance your win condition. Hey Hey, on the other hand, can, and it prevents your opponent from, you know, running away with the game on those lore generations. This ability of his, actually, this mindless wandering, can actually really accumulate a lot of stolen lore over the course of a game. And if your opponent's not questing with Hey Hey and they're just moving it back and forth to locations every turn, it can really be difficult for limited decks especially to deal with. At a 3/2, he does trade pretty favorably early on in this curve, and he is inkable as well. He also has some interactions with some of the other cards in the deck because he is a Hey Hey. I really like this particular card. This guy could even end up seeing some constructed play just because of this basically once per turn leech effect that he can do from your opponent, especially if you have multiple copies out. You know, for example, if you get all 3 of the copies of this one out in a game, you're siphoning off 3 lore every turn just for the cost of moving these characters to locations. So really like this card. It's 3 of in this deck. Simba, another uninkable 2-drop here. again, he's got 3 lore, which is great for constructed if you can build around him. There's nothing in this deck at all that protects this guy, so he is going to quest once and then die horribly. There are no bounce effects, really. There are no defenders in here. Like, really the only protection is if he's at a location and the vault door is in play, he gets, you know, resist 1. Just not a card that I like in limited formats. It would probably be a card I cut. Again, you know, you're at best, if he stays alive for the 1 turn, you're going to pay 2 to gain 3 lore once. I don't imagine a scenario in this limited deck where he gets to ready and quest again. We do have Cogsworth here, very solid. The 2 drops for 2/3. Again, he is a reprint from set 2 for him. The 2-drop Inkable. He does give your Reckless characters the ability to tap and gain a lore. So this deck does actually have a high number of Reckless characters in them. So he is pretty good early on the curve, both stat-wise and giving you the ability to turn those Reckless characters that are in the deck into potential lore generators. Duke Weaselton is another reprint here in the deck. He is a 2-drop Inkable 1/2, 2 lore generation with Ward. Not crazy good stat line. And again, no real way to protect him in the deck other than the ward that he has. So most people are going to take him out with their 1-drop 2/2s if they can, or their 2/3 2-drops. So he's not going to do a whole lot for you. He is inkable though. So if you're not on the play and you're already in kind of a board state where he's only going to be able to survive for a turn anyways, you know, you at least ink this one, whereas the Simba, you don't even have that option on it. We have Huey. Now, the deck does play Huey, Dewey, and Louie. It only has 1 copy of the rare here, which has the ability 3 nephews. Now, if you live the dream here and you get all 3 of them in play and quest, this is obviously an insane ability here. But just decent enough. I think all 3 of them have support. We'll look at them here in a minute, but the ability to quest and then throw your strength onto something else. As a 2-drop 2/2, though, he's a little understated and probably not going to survive. He's probably going to get an disproportionate amount of aggression on him just because nobody wants to see this 3 nephews ability trigger. And I think it's going to be pretty unlikely that it ever does in the limited play. We have Scrooge McDuck here, 2-drop 1/3, 1 lore generator. Not great stats for a 2-drop. He is inkable though, which is nice. And whenever this character quests, you can pay 1 less for the next item you play this turn. This deck doesn't play a ton of items, and the ones that play aren't really expensive or super impactful. So this ability is not particularly useful, and his stats are also not particularly useful. Not a great card, but he is at least inkable in the deck. We do have the Kakamora over here, 3 2s for 3, 1 lore generators, not inkable. They do have the ability Plunder. When you play this character, each opponent loses 1 lore. So this deck kind of has like a sub-theme of taking lore away from your opponent. Unfortunately, that's not a very good sub-theme. Equate it to like a healing or gain life sub-theme and like a game like Magic the Gathering, which is not a focus for any limited deck for sure, but even constructed, it's pretty hard to make work. And the fact that he's uninkable, this is probably a high priority card to cut from the list. Just stats wise alone, not very good for 3, and being uninkable just makes it a detriment drawing it when you need to be able to hit your curve consistently. Speaking of uninkables, we've got another set of 3 uninkables. We have Maui, the Soaring Demigod, 5/2 with Reckless, so he can challenge a lot of characters successfully. He is most likely going to get banished to anything that he does challenge, though, only having 2 willpower, so not great. He does have the ability In My Belly. Whenever a character of yours named Hey Hey quests, this character gets +1 lore generation and loses Reckless this turn. So he has 2 ways in the deck to turn off his Reckless. Again, at 3, this is very similar to like the Scar from set 1, which was like a 5/3 1 lore generator, but this one's not inkable. It's reckless and has 1 less willpower, and nobody really played the Scar. So again, not a great card. Being uninkable probably makes it a pretty big detriment in the deck. Has some interaction with the fishhook item that we'll see here in a little bit, but I don't know if it's enough to warrant its inclusion. We do have 3 of Webby Vanderquack, your vanilla 3/4 for 3, good stat line, decent body on 3, and inkable. We've got Dewey down here, does have support. He is a 2/3 for 2 lore generation and is inkable. A little understated for a 3-drop, but he does gain the support to kind of make up for it. Obviously does have the kind of Hail Mary interaction with his brother as well. We do have Gyro Gearloose here, also 3-drop inkable, 1/4, 1 lore generator, so pretty abysmal stats for a 3-drop, but does have the ability now try to keep up, which is you can exert him to put an item card from your discard on the top of your deck. Now, I do like this guy's potential for constructed, but as I mentioned before, this deck doesn't really have a lot of impact items, and none of them are banished after use in this deck either, so I don't know why he's included in this list, other than they're just trying to get as many DuckTale characters in this deck as they can. Again, not a real impact card, and at 1 lore generation with these stats at 3, easily replaceable in your extra cards. We do have Moana here, a slight upgrade to the 3/4 for 3 by gaining evasive, but at the cost of 1 more. Decent enough stats for being inkable. It's fine to play, nothing crazy. Evasive is a very nice ability to have, but on a 1 lore generator, it's going to take a very long time to finish off a game with a character like that. So not what I would really focus on there. Stats-wise, she is a bit of a downgrade from some of the other evasives that we've seen on 4, and that the fact that she only generates 1 lore, but has a little bit hardier stats up here to be able to challenge into opposing evasive characters. A lot of 3-attack evasive characters that we've seen in the limited card pool, so the fact that she can challenge those and still survive is nice. We do have Flintheart Glomgold over here at 4-drop as well. Very similar stats over here. He doesn't have evasive on your opponent's turn, but he does have evasive on your turn, so he can still challenge opponent's evasives, but he does get that 2nd lore generation over there as well. We have our Grandma Tala, probably the best card in this deck. She is a 4-drop common. She's a 3/3, 1 lore generation with the ability There Was Only Ocean. When you play this character, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You can put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So kind of like a beefed up Maleficent that we saw in set 1, and in limited card pools, card draw is very, very good. And this has got, the best card pool out of your top 2 cards, which is very nice. Decent enough stats at the 4-drop spot. A 3/3 is going to still trade pretty decently in this area as well. So very, very good card. A card that you're always going to kind of want to play and keep, probably not ink in any of the matchups that you're playing. And then we do have Louis, the last of the 3 brothers. He is a 4-drop, 3/4 with support and does have the 2 lore generation. This one's probably the best combination of stats that we see. I mean, the 4-drop, 3/4, 2 lore generation is pretty standard, and the fact that he just kind of got support without having to suffer anything on his stat line is pretty good on that one there. So a nice one on the kind of the 4-drop spot of the curve. You have 2 of your better hits for the deck. We do have the rare Moana, the Born Leader. She is a 5-drop, 4/4, 2 lore generation, so not crazy good stats, but not terrible. She does shift for 3, but you're not going to get her out any sooner than turn 5 either way, because the other Moana in this deck is a 4 cost as well. She can at least come in and quest on turn 5 and for a slight discount. She does have the ability Welcome to My Boat. Whenever this character quests while at a location, ready all other characters here. They can't quest for the rest of the turn. Pretty good ability. Allows you to kind of quest and then you get to restand and protect all of your guys, similar to the princess-specific Moana from set 1, or allows them to quest and then challenge into your opponent's board, which is very nice as well. Again, decent enough stats, good enough ability. This is one of those cards that very playable because it falls kind of in that 5-drop spot. 6 and 7 drops get a little bit harder to make sure that they happen, but 5s you should get to pretty consistently, even if you aren't hitting your card draw. We do have Maid Marian. Very similar stat line over here, obviously, to the Maid Marian with the ability of the Highborn Lady. When you play this character, chosen character gets -2 strength this turn. Those minus strength abilities are very nice in limited because in limited you are challenging a lot more than you usually are in constructed because there's a lack of removal. So she has a good body that comes in as a 4/4/2 lore generator and then can help you either trade up or trade into a character without losing your character as she's coming into play as well. And then our last character card is Scrooge McDuck. He's a 5-drop, uninkable, 3/5, 1 lore generator. Pretty terrible stat line for an uninkable 5-drop. He does have the ability to gain evasive during your turn, which again means he can basically challenge evasive characters. And he has the ability, I didn't get rich by being stupid. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may play an item for free. Again, there aren't really very many items in this deck, and there aren't any that are very expensive. So the fact that he would have to challenge a character, banish a character, and you have to have the item in your hand really just makes this a very difficult thing to pull off. That's really just not worth it even if you do. And again, a 5-drop uninkable with these stats is just not where I would be looking to do. Will he see some constructed play? He may very well, because being able to play him and plop down like your lucky coin on turn 5 is a very effective way to kind of get that into play early. In this limited deck, there's really no reason for this card to stay in. Getting into our actions, we've got 2 copies of Voyage. Move up to 2 characters of yours to the same location for free. It's a 1-drop. It's inkable, which is fine. The ability is not anything crazy good. The locations that are in here don't have really high movement cost, but it could save you some on the movement there. And the fact that it's inkable, you're probably got enough cards that aren't inkable that you're going to want to replace. This one's probably fine to stay in the deck. We do have 2 copies of Dragonfire, another set 1 reprint that are included here. One of the best removal spells you could ask for in the limited format. We do have 2 copies here. 2 cards that are uninkable that are in the deck that are definitely worth the spot in the deck. Moving into our items, like I said, we don't have a ton of items here. We got 1 of Maui's Fishhook, which I really do like this card. If you have one of those Mauis in play, you can use the Shapeshift ability for free, which means you still have to exert it, but you just don't have to pay the 2 ink cost. But again, don't think it's probably worth running those bad Mauis just to have that. The 2 ink cost isn't that prohibitive. With that 2 ink and exerting it, you have a chosen character gain evasive until the start of your next turn. So that would keep evasive on your opponent's turn, making it harder for that character to challenge. Or you can give a chosen character +3 strength this turn, which should allow you to challenge up pretty significantly on any of like your smaller characters. I mean, you have a 2-drop Hey Hey that starts with 3 strength, so this would effectively allow him to trade up into a 6 willpower character, which is going to take care of most stuff, especially in a limited format. Big fan of this card, and it's inkable as well. The Sumerian Talisman, you have 2 copies of this card, another 3-drop item with the ability during your turn, whenever one of your characters is banished in a challenge, you may draw a card. In a limited format, this card is probably fine. It is obviously not going to have any effect when your opponent challenges your characters and banishes them during their turn. But it does kind of allow you to, make that hopefully 1-for-1 trade and then replace the character you just lost with that card draw. So it can be really good in those matchups. Now, obviously, if you're finding yourself ahead to where you're not challenging your opponent's characters and they're just trying to challenge your stuff to slow you down, this card is completely useless in those situations. So, you always kind of hate to prioritize a card that is really there for catching up or when you're playing from behind. But again, it's inkable. There's plenty of uninkable cards in here to replace over this one, so I'd probably leave that one in as well. And then probably the best item that you have in the deck is the Vault Door, and it's the most expensive one at 4. It has the ability sealed away your locations and characters at locations gain resist 1. Now resist is obviously a very, very strong ability. With 2 copies of these decks, theoretically you could give all characters and all locations resist +2, which would make it very hard for your opponent to remove anything off of your board in a limited format. I think it's likely that you'll get 1 out each game, and I think this is one of those cards that can really turn the tide in this particular deck. But keep that in mind that, like the Sumerian Talisman that we have up here, which is really only good from kind of playing from behind, this one's really only kind of good when you're playing ahead. Now, it's a little bit better because you can still challenge and hopefully survive a little bit easier while doing those challenges, but mostly this is something that you're going to want to play to protect your ability to keep advancing your win condition on the board. So just be mindful, don't prioritize it too high. At 4, it's going to be kind of one of those hard cards to keep in an open hand if you don't have all the right pieces to go with it. And that brings us to our locations. We've got 5 locations. We have 2 copies of Montanui and 3 copies of Agrabah. Like I said, they only cost 1 to move to these locations, so Voyage isn't going to save you a ton there. Basically net you 1 extra ink if you play it on that turn. This one does allow you, whenever a character is banished while it's at this location, you can basically have that Grandma Tala effect where that character, instead of going to your discard, goes into your ink well when it is banished. It does generate 1 lore. I'll blow it up here so you can see it. 1 lore at the start of your turn each turn. So just keep that in mind if you're playing against it or you're playing with it, that you're going to generate that lore the following turn you play it. So if you need your opponent to not get it, you're going to have to deal with this 5 willpower before the start of their next turn. And then your other location is Agrabah. Again, is a 3-drop on this one, 5 willpower, 1 to move there. No effect at the location, but this one does have 2 lore generation on this particular location versus the 1 on the other one. So just a nice way to start generating lore, get your opponent to commit to taking this out and exposing their characters, hopefully for some favorable exchanges as well. All right, now as for the cards I would take out, as you can see, there's already 13 cards on this list that are not great. So depending on how many extra cards you're able to add to this deck, either for modifying it for personal play or by adding a pack to it and modifying it at a starter deck challenge, kind of take that into consideration that there is quite a few cards in here that I would look to upgrade. First and foremost is the Simba. Like I said, in his best case scenario is going to be 3 lore 1 time. In his worst case scenario, he's going to be an uninkable card when you need an inkable card, or played into your opponent having a random 1 damage that can take care of him. I would just be looking to put something like an inkable body into the deck at this point. You know, preferably something that generates 2 lore. Obviously, early on the curve, if you can get a 3-drop that can get you 2 lore, that's over the long course of the game going to generate, on average, probably 4 to 6 lore, where this guy is pretty much only ever going to give you 3 at best. Duke Weaselton, very kind of similar respects to the Simba. Now, he is inkable, so obviously a lower priority for taking out of the deck. If you have limited cards to replace or upgrade the deck with, I would leave this guy in for the sole fact that he is inkable, and versus the Simba being uninkable. The ward does help kind of guarantee that he's at least going to get to quest once, but again, this deck has no real way to protect him after that quest from being challenged, and having only 1 strength is going to make him pretty easy prey for most of what your opponent could be playing. Similarly, we have another inkable one again, which does kind of leave it in the deck if you have limited card options. But this stat line with this ability really just doesn't do anything in this deck. It allows you to play kind of the vault on turn 3 versus turn 4. but that really isn't worth the stats that this guy ended up with, in my opinion. Honestly, even in a constructed format where you can put higher value items in the deck, I just don't think this guy has a spot. Because, again, this is not a card you would ever play, and then the fact that it saves you one less for the next item, it's not like all items the next turn are one less. Like, it just -1 cost one time just isn't good enough for the stat line. The Kakamora over here, I would remove all 3 of them from the deck. It's uninkable, which is really bad, and its stats for a 3-drop are pretty terrible as well. Like, there's not any scenario where you're going to want to see this guy. If it is a situation where, you know, you really want to take lore away from your opponent, you're much better off having Hey and moving him around that turn versus, you know, paying 3 to play the Kakamora. Similar here, the Maui here in the 3-drop spot. As we mentioned, again, in the set 1, nobody was looking to play Scar. Like, he was kind of that last card you added, and he was a 5/3 inkable that could quest. This guy is a 5/2 with Reckless and uninkable. Like, there's just no reason to play this guy. The fact that he's an uncommon is pretty terrible as well. There's very little synergy that he gains with Hey is really just not worth it either. Like, if he is a problem, your opponent can trade into him with a 1-drop 2/2 very easily. Like, there's just no value really in this card for it to take up an uninkable spot in your deck. Also in the 3-drop spot, it is inkable again, so with limited options, this probably stays in just because of that. But again, we've established that this ability really does nothing in this limited deck at all. None of the items that you have are banished after use. There's going to be very limited item removal in a limited format. So there's really rarely ever going to have a reason to activate this ability. And a 1/4 that generates 1 lore for 3 just isn't a very good stat line. And then finally, we have Scrooge McDuck, another uninkable spot in this deck, taken up by a 3/5 1 lore generator, which does basically nothing for that stat line. Far better characters in that 5-drop spot. I mean, in comparison, you know, you're looking at 3 lore generating 5/5s, or 2 lore generating 5/5s, 4 5 that are inkable. So just, he's going to find it very hard to stay alive in that part of the curve. His ability to challenge evasive characters is really not worth that much of a trade-off either. And his second ability here, as we've already established, does literally nothing in this deck. Playing a 5-drop, which is your highest cost card in the deck, to potentially cheat into play at most a 4-drop item is just not going to be worth it most games. And again, the being uninkable means that he would be a higher priority, especially as a 5-drop, for me to cut and take out of the deck. So there you guys have it, the full breakdown of the Ruby and Sapphire Starter Deck, as well as some cards that I would identify for removal or upgrading if you're looking on playing this deck for either a Starter Deck challenge or just for casual play. Now, I will say the biggest detractor for me for this deck is the very high number of unimpactful, uninkable cards that are in the list. There's also a lot of sub-themes in there that don't have a lot of synergy with each other, a lot of item cost reduction and cheating items into play, but not really any super impactful items, or the ones that are good aren't even really that expensive. So if you are looking at choosing this deck for one of the starter deck challenges, those are probably the biggest hurdles that you're going to have to get over. But I'd love to hear your feedback on the deck as well, or any questions you guys may have down in the comment section below. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.